And thanks everybody for being here today. The American Press Institute is sort of an applied think tank. We rebooted the organization in 2013 from a place that did seminars, rather expensive seminars, to a place that was really trying to help newsrooms. We think of ourselves as the scouts to the cavalry, riding ahead and trying to figure out what's coming next for newsrooms. So just I want to say a couple words about elections. I was a political reporter and a media writer for a long time. Elections are revelatory for the media in several ways. One is that it's a story that we cover for a year or longer. And when you focus that much media attention on one topic, it always ends up exposing a lot about how the media works. And so we learn an enormous amount each presidential election about the state of media. It also, obviously, elections reveal something about voters, usually things that we didn't know. And then elections also reveal something about the political culture beyond voters. If you think about this, we discovered a lot about the rise of the alt-right media in 2016. A lot more people knew who Steve Bannon was after that election than they did before. In 1992, my first book was about the 92 election in Clinton. That was the year, if people remember, that networks sort of lost control of the election, and Ross Perot announced he was going to run on cable news, on CNN, on Larry King, who had no role in presidential elections before that. The web in 2008, the Obama campaign, the importance of Twitter in 16 with Trump. So there's lessons to be learned that we need to extract from the elections, and that's part of what we're doing here today. Elections also tend to be seen as outside the norm in weird ways. We view elections as a special case versus governing. And often I think we do that to our detriment. There are things that we can learn about our readers and about voters that we need to carry forward into our coverage of governing between the elections. What is it that matters to people? What engages them? These grants were an accident. Our initial plan for the Trusted Election Network did not involve microgrants, but when we had money for travel and other things, and we knew there were things that you guys wanted to do and couldn't do because of the economic pressures of the pandemic. The grants gave us a chance to see projects that you wanted to do and the assumptions about audiences that were embedded in those projects, and then to test the results as you learned what worked and what didn't. We ended up, as Andrew said, given 36 grants for projects about misinformation and voters. We ended up with $220,000 worth of money to give away. And we gave those to people in newsrooms in 21 states. And you're gonna hear a little bit today about the results on revenue, on engagement, and beyond. There was a study that was released today by Northwestern University that found that local newsrooms increased subscriptions by 50% in 2020. That's off of a low base, admittedly, but still that's an extremely good year for subscriptions out of necessity. But part of that is because of the interest that was caused by elections and by the pandemic. This became a more relevant year for local news than it had been in the past. So with that, I'm gonna, as a background, what interests us here at API is, what did you guys learn? Not that you'll use in the next election, but that you'll start using in the next month as we move from an election mode to a governing mode. With that, I'll hand it over to John. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, everyone. So glad you're here with us today. As Andrew mentioned, we're going to try to reserve questions and discussion for the breakout portion of today's event, so hold on to those if possible. We're going to start those presentations in a moment, but as a reminder to our speakers, each presentation should be around 5 or 6 minutes, and I'll alert our presenters at the 5-minute mark via DM and video when you have 1 minute left in your allotted time. So keep an eye on those so we can stay on schedule. And now on to our presenters. First off, we have John Frank, political reporter and beer writer for the Colorado Sun, who I'm sad to report will not be talking to us about beer, but will be talking to us about the Colorado Voter Guide and election coverage. John, you can share your screen and take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. And thanks to API for the opportunity to participate in this event. Let me make sure everyone can see that there. Just a quick intro. The Colorado Sun is a journalist-owned, member-supported, online-only publication. We launched in 2018 with 10 former Denver Post reporters and editors. And when it comes to politics, we're really focused on trying to reinvent political coverage, do things differently, because we entered this with the idea that it was broken to start with. And so we took part in the Trusted Elections Network to help build our capacity, in particular to address voter information needs and misinformation, as well as create some new features and build on our work in prior elections. I'll offer a quick overview of our strategy and then some lessons learned from each of them, put together a very simple presentation of just some headlines so you can get a sense of our broader political coverage. But to start with, to Tom's point, we started with the assumption that, Colorado is one of the safest places to cast a vote in America. We're a mail ballot state who's done this before. But ahead of the 2020 election, we started to see a decline in trust among our readers. And the situation demanded a new approach to election coverage, one more focused on the basics of voter information needs, and less on the he said, she said, and fundamentals of how a campaign works. So our coverage strategy was fivefold. Audience engagement, explaining the process, using data to get facts out into the media landscape, interacting with voters and not allowing them to interact with us and our information, as well as making that information more accessible. So I'll jump into it. When it came to audience engagement, given the dynamic, we wanted to start by listening to our audience because it changed so much. So we asked for their help in identifying information gaps by asking questions, asking them to submit questions about the election. We received nearly 100 responses and far more questions. Many responses have about 5 questions embedded in each. And we've published a 4,000 plus word Q&A, anchor linked for organization. And we also translate into Spanish, which is the first time we've ever done that. And to top it all off, we hosted an election forum with top state and national experts. 2 former secretaries of state joined us on that call, as well as a cybersecurity expert. Now, the lessons learned here is that the questions were far more basic than we imagined. And for instance, one of the most popular questions was, do I have to vote in every race for my ballot to count? That mindset and seeing these questions really reset what we tried to do. And we went with a more basic approach, but I think a more user-friendly approach when it came to our election coverage. In terms of explainers, some of those questions we received actually turned into a handful of standalone stories. So we did entire explainers on some of those more complicated questions. And this complemented our broader approach on explainers. Here at the Sun, we're known for taking complex topics and breaking them down and making them understandable. So we detailed the 11 statewide ballot measures. Here in Colorado, we do a lot of direct democracy. And we did explainer in each and then compiled them all in a Reader's Digest version, a hub of sorts where folks can find more information. We also moderated some televised forums on a handful of measures with our local PBS partner. Now, when it came to data, I love data and graphics. So we tackled a couple of important projects. We secured with API's generous help the state's voter database and looked at why ballots were rejected and presented the facts in a graphics heavy explainer that was designed to fight misinformation before it even started. And we also looked at states' efforts to fix some of these ballots. And when it came to some of the other projects, we took inspiration from national publications. We created an early vote tracker and a poll tracker. And most importantly, these two included context to help explain what these numbers mean, using polling averages, et cetera, that went beyond the basics. This is information that could easily be manipulated, numbers and statistics lying and all that. We hear that often from readers. The lesson learned here is we had huge interest in these features, and we were able to better educate people on these topics and combat misinformation in many ways before it even started. New this year for our election coverage were some voter guides. We debuted reported voter guides broken down in interactive graphics, searchable by candidate and by topic. We started this in the Democratic presidential primary and carried it through the fall. The lesson learned here is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. We took our favorite elements from all the national publications that put together similar voter guides, and we made them just as interactive as the national ones. But what we did is we made them Colorado specific. So you'll see those issues are very Colorado specific, and each of those questions has Colorado either in the title or in the answer. So we wanted to give readers a very localized approach to the very nationalized political year. And the most exciting part of our project was our pop-up newsletter. And we sent a newsletter once a week for 5 weeks leading up to the election. The main goal was to keep it casual and short. One, to respect readers' time, and two, to reach people who are turned off by political content, who don't actually digest a lot of our really in-depth political stories. We used emojis as bullet points, as you'll see. Research shows as kind of the ideal length for a marketing newsletter. So we took a bit of a selling approach to this. The lesson learned here was that readers loved the different formats and the personalized approach. When it came to sending this, I wrote it like I was emailing a friend. Readers felt like they had a connection with us through this kind of format. And it really encapsulated what we tried to do here. So the bottom line of our entire strategy was that this user-focused approach to political reporting that answers basic questions, allows people to learn more, and empower successful and much loved by our audiences. I think what we learned in this project will guide our political coverage from here on out. And that's all I have. Obviously, welcome to talk more in the breakouts later, but thanks again, John and API, for letting us share.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate that. Again, yeah, we'll continue talking some more in the breakout session. So definitely stay tuned for that. Director of Enlace Latino NC will speak to the impressive explanatory election coverage that Enlace worked on for Spanish-speaking and Latino audiences in North Carolina. Thanks, Paola, and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Paola Jaramillo. I am the co-founder and executive director with Enlace Latino NC. My partner is Walter Gomez. About Enlace Latino is the first non-profit organization in Spanish in North Carolina. Everything is online. Our audience is the Latinx community, the first generation that speak Spanish like the first language. About our project, I am sharing my, may you give me the opportunity to share my co-host, please, my screen.
Andrew, do you have that capability? I'm not sure if I'm a co-host, sorry.
Walter is the co-host right now.
Yeah, I just made him. He should be able to share his screen now.
Okay. No.
Okay, 1 second, sorry.
No problem, thank you.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. You should have it now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Our project was Tu voz es poder, your voice is power. If education, if information and education about the electoral process or our community in North Carolina. Everything that we shared, it was in Spanish for the Latino community. What we did an electoral guide. We had information and education about the early voting, the ballot, the election day logistic, how to read and understand the ballot, the voter ID, register to vote, problems with the voting process and how to report them, voter rights and responsibilities, where to vote. We have a long presentation about the Latino candidates and the other candidates, important candidates for the Senate, the General Assembly, the fiscal, the governor, the vice-governor, and important dates. We made educational and informative story. We wrote more than 140 state and local stories about the electoral process and the general election, didactic resources about infographics, podcasts, videos, explainer videos, virtual town hall on Facebook. About the infographics, it's just like this, more than 20 infographics, explanatory infographics, 5 podcasts, 42 videos, more than 20 explainer videos, and 12 virtual town hall on Facebook. I don't know, maybe, okay. This is just like infographics. It's an example. This is a short video, 30 seconds. This is about how to register in the electoral register, in the voting, for the voting. This is the step-by-step how to vote by mail. The most important for us was educate our community and try to guide our community step by step in how to vote, how to register, what is the important date, what documentation do you need? Because for our community, this process is very new and difficult to understand, and it's a large process too. So we try to give the more important information about the whole electoral process. How the audience reach and all resources and coverage. So it's more likes and followers on Facebook, more shares, more interaction and comments. In total, is more audience for us. We have right now close to yes, and double the audience. What we learned, we got to know that our audience better. The Latino community is not monolithic. It's not all one Latino community. We have a lot of the different groups inside the Latino community. The Latino community needs more information that is practical and useful for them. WhatsApp is an excellent method to interaction for us, for our community. The voter education addressing the what, where, and how of the election process is essential to great electoral participation. So that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Gracias, Paola. Now we're going to move on to Megan Griffith-Green, the service features editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, who will tell us about what they learned in translating their comprehensive voting FAQ into the next most spoken languages in the Philadelphia area. Take it away, Megan.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. And I just want to say it's been such a lovely experience being part of this cohort of really exciting and interesting projects and hearing about the other projects that have been going on. So it's wonderful to continue to hear about that stuff today. I'm just going to share my screen with any luck. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. So I'm the service features editor at the Inquirer. As part of our 2020 election coverage, what we wanted to do from the service desk is really find some way to really help people understand and encourage people to vote, especially this year when there was so much uncertainty. I don't know if you guys heard this, but Pennsylvania was there was some things going on this year. So, we felt that the need to get some accurate, good, clear information out there was very important. We are a Harkin newsroom. We use the Harkin module. So we had a lot of really good intelligence early on from people. And I just want to reiterate something that John said, which is so key to how we approach this, which is your audience is not necessarily where you think they are. And we were definitely getting questions that expressed very early on just how basic some of the confusion was. There was a lot of confusion and uncertainty about mail-in voting in particular, and we wanted to sort of make it all easier for people. These were sort of our general objectives for the project, which was, this is public service journalism. This is really important for us to make the best use of the material and the information and the expertise we have. We thought the audience engagement piece was obviously a very big part. There were some opportunities here for us to improve our story form and functionality to make it better and more accessible and more usable for readers. And then also we wanted to explore how we could distribute this off platform, especially keeping in mind to some of the points that have been raised before now, that not everyone is a political nerd and goes and looks for information on news sources. We really felt it was important to get this information in front of people as much as possible. So the piece that was really made possible through this program and through this grant was we took our guide, which was this massive comprehensive project that we undertook, and we translated it into 5 languages total, including English. So we had it in 5 languages. I'm just going to show you guys it quickly. Let me know if you can see this since I'm moving to a different window. Can you guys see this? All right, that's good. So this was our FAQ. We wanted to make it really easy to kind of skim and understand what was here. We've broken it into sections covering the basics of how to vote by mail, how to vote in person, more questions. And we broadened it in a later iteration to just include even the basics of why should I vote, and who is on the ballot, and am I eligible, and why is it important, and what difference does it make? And each of these questions, it's very easy to kind of navigate to, and they're each shareable as individual pieces of content, which we thought was important. And the exciting thing, which was really new for us, was we were able to translate this and have this we did this in Spanish, in simplified Chinese, in traditional Chinese, and also in Vietnamese, which is what you're seeing here. I'm just going to go back to the presentation if I can. Okay, great. So, here we go. One question that we considered early on is this would be great to translate it, but what is the actual, reason why we should be looking at this? And this is it right here. That 23% of people in Philadelphia don't speak English at home. So we looked into the demographics and found out that the reason we chose these languages was because they were the most commonly spoken languages next to English. there were kind of two really main goals for the language piece of the project. One is extending the impact of the work that we were already doing. You know, we'd already kind of started to put together the English version of the FAQ, and this was about like really extending that reach further into the community. The second piece was the real challenge, which was creating workflows to make this work possible. This really meant there was a lot of this project that we did not have the capability to do in-house and had to figure out a way to make it work. So the translation process, this is how I broke it down. We identified and developed relationships with translators. My very high bar, which I wasn't sure we were going to meet, and we did, was we identified translators who had both experience in elections, in journalism, and also in translation. So, you know, we were able to kind of find the best people to kind of translate this work. I also built in this extra step because I come from fact checking, and there was absolutely no way that incorrect information was going to go out. That was my biggest fear from the beginning. So every single one of our translations was vetted and reviewed by relevant experts. I mean, you know, I was putting out stuff that I can't read. And that is a terrifying place to be as an editor. So we made sure that we had those checks in place for vetting and fact checking and copy editing the information. I want to just mention that the translation and vetting happened through multiple updates of this information. We had about 50 questions in the FAQ covering about 5,000 words. And we needed to keep it all updated through multiple changes in the process and, you know, as court cases got resolved. So that was a monumental undertaking, just keeping it updated and translated and vetted in 5 languages. The production piece of it is maybe a little more boring for this room, but was a challenge for us, which is like, how do we get this material into our system? You know, how do we work in multiple languages and just facilitate the production side of it? And then the fourth piece is the distribution piece, which is working with community partners to let people know that it's here and make the copy available. This is just some of the material that went out through community partners to help kind of spread the word. So, you know, really what I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we learned from this project. And, you know, we got some really interesting results that will definitely help us in the future. One is, you know, we learned about audience acquisition pathways. We kind of know what that looks like in English. We don't know that as much for different language groups. So for example, people found our Chinese and Vietnamese translations through direct links primarily. So that is us reaching out to people, letting you know it's there, and then having them share those links with other people in the community. The Spanish versions, we found that a lot of people were coming to it through search and social. So, I mean, that will definitely influence how we think about translation projects in the future and how we get them in front of people and get them out to the community. The other thing that was really fascinating about sort of the metrics when we were sort of going through them is that they reflected a really deep engagement from audience. The numbers weren't huge. We were not expecting the numbers to be absolutely massive, but they did reflect that really deep engagement. About a number of people, a very high percentage of people came back more than once. For some of the language groups, that was as high as 30% who came back to the FAQ more than once. For repeat visits, and they spent a long time. The real standout there was our simplified Chinese version, where I'll stop sharing, where the time on page was close to 6 minutes. It was close to 6 minutes in the FAQ. And if you think about that language group for a second, which in Philadelphia, the simplified Chinese community is largely a newer immigrant community, you know, thinking about that group spending that amount of time in this story that is designed to enable and empower people to exercise their right to vote, it becomes a really powerful experience, I think, when we think about like the impact that might have had. So those are some of our like broad takeaways, which was, you know, about figuring out how to make this happen, how to get it in front of people, and then, you know, informing future projects as to how we can better distribute this and what the value is. You know, I work in evergreen long form service. We do a lot of civics is like a really big theme for me. So even if it's not necessarily election related, if it's, you know, our tenants' rights guide or, you know, some of our civic engagement explainers, I think we will definitely be in a better position to translate.
Thank you so much, Megan. We could talk about translation for quite a while, and I really appreciate your insight on those workflows. Just next, we're gonna talk with Grant. We have Anjanette Delgado, Senior News Director for Digital, here to tell us how they address false information.
All right, great. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and also Ashley Nurbavig is on this call. She was our reporter for this, so she'll be able to participate, I think, in the breakout sessions and help us through some of the Q&A on that. But I want to thank API for the grant and for generously including us in this program. It was an amazing experience for us, and I know that we were able to fulfill our stated mission as the Free Press going into the election season and coming out the other end, and we're still not out the other end yet in Michigan. We are still doing a hand count in Antrim County today, so it just will not stop here. But we went into this really deciding that we wanted to be able to not be surprised by what happened on election day, and I think for the most part we delivered on that, largely due to what we were able to do with this grant and through Ashley's reporting. So what we did to cover mis and disinformation threats to the vote in Michigan, we take our position as a swing state very seriously, and we had a sense of what happened in 2016, and we wanted to make sure we were on guard for that in 2020. So throughout her 6 weeks with us, Ashley contributed or wrote 21 stories. They published in the Free Press, in USA Today, in the Holland Sentinel in Michigan, the Arab American News in Michigan, and My Korean Weekly in Michigan as well. Her work was cited by BuzzFeed News and PolitiFact. She's still getting mentioned. She appeared on Detroit radio day of the election. She interviewed or voiced 5 Free Press audio stories, and she appeared on a YouTube program with USA Today's Susan Page. So we did keep her quite busy. We called this an always on investigative beat, and she was truly always on. I think she's now only starting to catch up on sleep. But let me back up to, yeah, so starting with this one. So we knew that we were creating a beat that we didn't have experience in. We had experience covering elections, we've had experience covering Michigan, but we had not really had a focused, targeted misinformation beat. And so as we were getting our foothold in how to cover this sort of a beat, we really leaned on the experts. And so in order for Ashley to get up to speed, for me to get up to speed, I was not an editor in Michigan in 2016. We did a really good look back and leaned on the experts in the field. And so we reached out to academics, to journalists, to elections experts, to everyone we could to figure out exactly what happened in 2016 and set the table for us and for our readers. So this was that story. And what we learned first and foremost is that while the influence in 2016 was largely foreign, that in 2020, everyone was geared up from someone was that it was really 2016 gave everybody a playbook to mess with the election in 2020. So we were on alert for that. And their message was it would be domestic. And if you take a look at the false information alert, was not there on election day. But if you look in that left side image, you'll see the building looks like a castle. That's actually 2 blocks from my house. And so when they said this would be domestic, they were not kidding. The person who shared this is from Michigan. Near as we could tell, we reached out. He wasn't that interested in talking on, had been going on for some time, but all of a sudden someone visited and took these pictures and said, uh-oh, you know, we're geared up for something in Detroit. And so took pictures of the bricks. When I went down there to check this out, I fully expected the bricks to not be there. They were there. But the man who was doing the construction project had been asked to cover them up and really tape them down so nothing could happen. But it was this kind of thing that was very local and very much on, you know, Facebook and some other platforms that really just set the stage for it being very domestic, and also for this narrative that you still hear now, which is that you can't trust. TCF is it used to be called Cobo Hall. It's where the big auto show is in Detroit every year. They decided to do the vote count at TCF this year. And so a lot of what we did to report on this was coming from and out of TCF. And thanks to, I think, one of the sessions that you guys had here, oh, I'm getting the rush sign, we knew to be at TCF. And so this was a particular point, and she made the point here that a lot of what was coming out was actually in video form, which is a lot more of a challenge for the platforms to moderate. And so this is a video. And here's Antrim County. I mentioned that there's still hand counting in Antrim County today, just as an audit, but you can see in that bottom left, that was the Election Integrity Partnership, and they actually tracked the origin of some of the tweets around the Dominion voting system. So we made a clear decision pretty early on to look at, instead of just simple fact checking, and I don't mean that fact checking is really simple, it's very complicated, but to look at provenance and origin and networks as we were doing this. And here is an example of a fact check we did around magic votes. We deliberately made this one visual. We wanted that to travel on social. We looked into dead voters, and this, if this comes up in the Q&A, Ashley should be able to explain this, but this was fascinating. People were just downloading this list of voters and really applying what we would think of as traditional journalistic skills to really figure out, like, who are these people who are supposedly dead and yet still voting in Michigan. And you can see this quote bottom left, "I just don't want fact checks to decide what's fact for me." We found a UC Davis graduate from out in his internet sleuth that was going through all of this. And that statement really came true as we were going through a lot of this, that people just wanted to make their own decisions about what was true and what was not. Here we get into the Board of Canvassers, which no one pays attention to until this year. And all of a sudden it's on Zoom and people are crashing the Zoom room. And so that's how we got into doxing. And we found a lot of the real world effects of what was going on. This is the state level of the canvassers. And people really went after, Norm Schinkel is a Republican on the Board of Canvassers, and they went after his brother's flower shop. And that quote on the left, "cancel culture," is really terrifying when you're in crosshairs. They on Yelp and some different things like that. And so you'll see, you know, can't deliver flowers, but then you'll see these reviews about ethics and other things. So that ended up being one of our, this was our project finale. People decided their own truths. And so this came out toward the end that feels a lot like, I think, a research report on what happened to Michigan in 2020, which is what the goal of this project was to do. We learned a lot. I want to close with just take care of yourself. Covering this kind of work, we learned in doing this, Ashley did, I did, that it's very disorienting, and you need to grab the rails at times and just figure out which end is up. And there was a moment when she had to ask me, like, what was true and what was not. So take care of yourself, take breaks, have a buddy, don't go in alone. And those are the highlights, but thank you. I'm happy to talk more in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Anjanette. Again, that's a very important message. And I'll see you in our breakout room soon. Next up, we have Ashton Pittman, senior reporter at the Mississippi Free Press, will tell us more about their election data work and visualizations and the solutions events that were informed by those findings.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with John McGee, our project coordinator. He's in the chat, along with our editor, Donna Ladd. So our focus on the Mississippi Trusted Elections Project was really to, first of all, recognizing that there's always going to be concerns about voter suppression in Mississippi. And so we really wanted to push transparency and act as a watchdog, especially in this election, considering that our state did not take the same steps other states did to make voting safer and easier in the pandemic. So we made sure to put a focus on looking at changes focused on the precinct level. We did a lot of infographics work with maps, interactive maps that voters could look at. We had an absentee map to show weekly absentee data. But our main focus, again, was polling place changes. Now, this ended up not being as simple as we thought it would be. There was no accurate, publicly available list of precinct changes, is something that we found. And even Secretary of State precincts since the primaries accurately. Local officials are supposed to let them know when they make those changes, but they were not. So what we ended up having to do was we had to get a list from the statewide elections database, which is not publicly available, for May to see what those polling locations looked like at that time. And then we had to get one in October. And so we had to go line by line through 1,800 different precincts to look for polling place changes, to look for address changes. The Secretary of State's office in October released this list, which shows 13 changes to polling locations. That's what the Secretary of State's office was aware of. We found 50 polling place changes. And we were able to report these changes with a list that people could scroll through. They could look up their counties, and they could look at the map to see where those happened. This allowed other publications in the state to let people know about changes in their own towns and counties. The Secretary of State's office, after we put out this list, they updated their list as well and included. Now, another thing we found, though, was that you cannot just look and see where addresses changed to identify changes in polling places, because there are some things that are more local that the Secretary of State's office, even if they did track changes to just polling addresses, would not pick up on. A local candidate who became a whistleblower, basically, while door knocking, found that voters were not aware that their polling place had changed since the primaries. And what we uncovered was that Madison County, which is a historic white flight suburb outside of the capital city of Jackson, Madison County had quietly rezoned more than 2,000 mostly Black and Hispanic voters out of a majority white precinct for the election. 3,000 in general, with only 25 parking spaces and 5 polling stations in a small apartment clubhouse that made it difficult to socially distance. The change meant that the now overwhelmingly white recreation center precinct on the other side of that area suddenly served about the same number of people, but with hundreds of parking spaces and twice as many polling stations and ample room for social distancing. This story got a lot of attention, both locally and nationally. Local news organizations picked it up, which was great because it helped inform voters in that area about their precinct change. And some of these people have been voting in this place for 12 years. The Marks Department precinct ended up having super long lines that went up the road, past shopping malls, and the majority white precincts. Thankfully, we only got reports of a few people who went to the wrong precinct and stood in line. Still too many, but hopefully this was successful in helping inform people in that area so that it was able to be kept to a minimum. Another thing we did, about a week before the election, we held solution circles where we invited people across the state to join us for a virtual solution circle to talk about issues on voting in the state and to discuss possible solutions to those issues. And so the idea here was to not only listen to what they had to say for the purposes of the past election, or the election that was upcoming at the time, but also for future elections. John McGee, again, project coordinator, said, "For us, we learned that the community and voters are oftentimes most aware of issues with the electoral system or with local government and precincts. Without hearing from them directly, we would have lost insight from some of the most important and valuable sources." And that was one of the lessons that we learned. We also learned Mississippians are hungry for hard evidence and real data about changes in the electoral system, not just the usual anecdotal stories and rumors. That we cannot rely on our state top voting officials to have this information readily available, and not just to look for obvious changes when trying to identify changes in voting. We will be soon starting work on phase 2 of this, which will include more solution circles. Thank you for this opportunity, and we really appreciate your support.
Thanks so much, Ashton. Really appreciate you sharing those insights. Mississippi is a kind of a wild place to hear about voting, so the work you did is very, very appreciated and noted. And now I'll invite Lovey Cooper, the managing editor for Scalawag, to talk to us about engaging and listening to audiences and how that helped guide them through a very difficult election cycle as well in the South.
Hey everyone, I don't have a presentation, but I am going to drop a link to the coverage that I'm about to be talking about if anyone feels inclined to scroll along as I read off my notes here. But hi, I'm Lovey. I'm our managing editor at Scalawag magazine. We are a super small, woman-led, POC-led, queer-led nonprofit media org that produces journalism and storytelling about the South. And in all dominant narratives about the region as a whole. So we kind of straddle this line between regional, local, and national coverage. You know, we're writing about the whole South. We are based throughout the whole South. We have hub cities in Durham, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, and Birmingham, Alabama, where we have these high concentrations of members who are supporting our work. So state politics versus national politics, especially in an election year, has been something that's been super difficult for us to suss out, especially with such a small team. It's hard to decide what to devote our precious time and attention to, and like for what payoff. A lot of the times there's a lot of all hands on deck moments in past years where we either did or didn't see the kind of payoff that we thought we would see with that, right? So that kind of sets the stage for how we were going into the challenge of this year. Another thing that happened this year is we discontinued our print publication, which up until this point we've been, or up until this past March or so, we were very much a print forward publication. We were putting out this quarterly magazine that kind of set the theme for the year and the tone of our coverage, and our online coverage was important but supplemental to that in the meantime. So we were facing this huge moment at the worst time probably that it could come throughout this year. The other thing that we do a little bit differently that was kind of guiding our thinking going into this election is that we try to do as much as we can movement journalism, which is different from some of this traditional election coverage and political coverage where we're producing news that is grounded in the experiences of and identities of oppressed people, training journalists that we work with to be stakeholders in these conversations and not just objective reporters. and really sharing information that informs strategy on the ground and it is actionable and not just informative, but also inspiring a lot of the time. So with all of that preface, what we decided to do to figure out, what could we do this year that was answering our audience's questions? Well, we asked them, what questions do you have about voting, about voter suppression? What are you scared of? What are you worried about? We launched on a platform called Subtext, which if you click the link there, you'll see the little sign up box there where folks could text us, SMS message us directly their questions and be put in direct contact with our editorial team. What we also did at this kind of early stage while we were figuring out, what direction are we going, what are people interested in, we got in touch with a lot of these other nonprofit organizations, movement organizations, people who are on the ground doing this work, and ask them, what are questions that you have that you're not able to answer, right? What are questions that people in your communities still have? Like, what role can we fill in this giant network of people, working overtime, combating misinformation, all of this, and really make that a cohesive network where we are not replicating the efforts of any other organizations, but enhancing them. And if someone asks us an easy question on the text line, like, where do I go to mail this in again, or what have you, that we could point them to the people that were already doing that work, that were answering those questions. We say, oh, I see you're in Atlanta. We know these people here who can answer that directly. Do you have any other questions? Do you have anything else? Once you get in touch with them. So kind of rethinking, I think, the journalism role in those early stages in the movement journalism conversation, at least for us. So we brought on an amazing team of kind of a micro newsroom within our micro newsroom, where we had Anoa Changa in Atlanta, who is an amazing wealth of information. She was just down with the cause, wanted to help out. We also brought on two amazing young reporters that were writing from North Carolina and Tennessee. And how we started with this was basically a brain huddle between me, the three of them, going over the texts that we had each week. And what we came up with were video interviews, deeper reporting that went along with that. We were thinking, okay, these are folks who reached out to us via text. This is a different audience than we've seen reach out to us over email or on social media. This is an entirely new platform, right? Well, what's an entirely new way for us, at least, that we can reach back out to them with this? What's something that we think they're going to pay attention to? And how can we keep that conversation going so that people aren't just dropping off their questions and then not engaging with us? So we put out these weekly videos. We paired them with deeper written reporting each week that we did, where the main video was answering this kind of more broad question that we were seeing from people, curiosities, I guess is a better term for that. And the written reporting kind of honed in on a more local level to pair that with the video, to where we were making sure that we weren't losing our audience that already knew what they were coming to us for, right? With this bright, shiny new thing that we were devoting a lot of attention for. So we kind of use that as a multi-pronged approach to not scare anyone off and hopefully draw a lot of people in. And it really paid off. The biggest thing that we saw from all of those questions was, people wanted context. People wanted myths to be busted. People came to us for analysis and came to us for this lens that we could offer to it. I think that really strengthened folks' trust in us as an authority on some of these issues, which was really amazing to see. Especially because, writing about the South and writing about rural places and writing about these disenfranchised places, there is a mistrust of media. Of all media, right? And being able to kind of offload some of that burden, I guess, for lack of a better word, onto, here are the experts that we're interviewing. Here are the other people who know exactly what they're talking about, and we are here to deliver that to you. Yeah, really, I think strengthened our relationship with those readers and brought in new folks who otherwise maybe wouldn't have thought to seek something like this out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Levy. Appreciate those sharing those findings and how that went for you guys. And I'll move on to Ben Trefnies, who's a news director for the public radio station KALW in San Francisco, to talk as well a little bit about engaging audiences in the Bay Area.
Right, thank you very much, John, and really appreciate hearing from all these different presenters. I think a lot of it's very inspiring and harkens to some of what we were trying to do as well. And thank you also to the American Press Institute for this work and everybody who's here for your attention. I am sharing my screen here, and yes, I was just on the Scalawag website, and it's really cool, and I like that subtext thing as well. Here is ours, and what we have always done since, since 2016. Before 2016, we did a lot of outreach along Harkin kinds of models for trying to meet the needs of our audience where it was at. And in California, there's a kind of direct democracy here where rather than have legislators vote on things as representatives, a lot of the issues end up going before voters, which leads to an absolutely overwhelming amount of propositions that are on our ballots. In San Francisco this year, we had 25 to consider. And so this goes back many, many years. And what we ended up doing in trying to meet those needs of our audience was to create something called election briefs, which is 2-minute pieces that are well-researched and entertaining and highly produced that end up summarizing what elections issues are about. So one thing that we did here this year was we really doubled down on that. And so you could see statewide, we had 12 propositions that needed to be considered. And as we were thinking about how we wanted to adjust that this year, we wanted to reach out in Spanish as well. So we took those 12 propositions and we produced them in Spanish. And so I'll click on one here. You could see that, we had a graphic for it. And then this is a 2-minute piece that we hired translators to make these into Spanish as well. So that was kind of our baseline. You could see also, as you look through this voter guide, that there are a lot. And when we got into counties as well, and this year we decided that we wanted to make sure to cover to be as equitable as possible, all 9 counties of the Bay Area, including the California measures and all the measures that people would be considering in these places. So you could see there's just a lot of them. San Francisco itself had 13. And so we mobilized our entire staff to cover these things. But beyond that, as our baseline, in this particular election in 2020, we were thinking along the same lines as a lot of the rest of you in who will be voting and who is not getting the information that you need to get. And we wanted to activate to, if not mobilize the vote, to at least help to meet the information needs that people in different communities had. So we had a summer intern who was working on elections study precincts to determine what were the lowest voter turnout communities in the Bay Area. We identified 5 of them. They were part of Fairfield, which is in Solano County, part of Contra Costa County in the city of Richmond, an area called the Iron Triangle, part of West Oakland, kind of near downtown Oakland, part of San Francisco's Bayview Hunters Point, and then part of East Palo Alto as well. And we knew that a lot of people who are in these communities didn't necessarily listen to KALW, public media. Even though it's supposed to serve the entire public, it ends up serving a more limited audience often. And particularly for a station like ours that doesn't have a lot of marketing budget, we know that a lot of people in these communities aren't going to necessarily hear what we have to say, even if we have a good intention to inform them as best as possible. So we produced, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second. We produced a pamphlet, a door hanger that we made in English that we actually brought to, and I'll show you what some of the things say on it, we produced 5,000 of these. We went into each one of those precincts and went door to door with our team. And we produced it in Spanish as well, because there's a big Spanish speaking audience in San Francisco, or in the Bay Area. So English and Spanish. And we went door to door into these precincts and we distributed those and spoke with people. Different members of our news team went and got information from people, tried to engage again through Harkin platforms so that we could get the right questions answered and then direct some of our coverage in the election briefs we were making with them. Also knowing that we cover an entire basically 7 million person area, there were other media outlets that do a really strong job of connecting with these communities in particular. And so we outreached and partnered with some of these groups, El Tecolote, the Oakland Side, Richmond Confidential, Hoodline, San Francisco Bayview, to leverage our work and then be able to share information and resources. And knowing that we're just about out of time, we followed that up by creating a voter guide that was site specific. This one is for East Palo Alto, and it had information about where you could go ahead and vote, where your precinct office was, and then also information about the different state propositions and who funded them. That we presented 6,000 of these. We also made a QR code so that it would bring you back to that page that I just showed you, and actually very specifically into what the voting measures in your precinct were. And we not only had our news staff go out and myself, but also we invited listeners to KALW to go and engage in that process as well. We finally spoke with a lot of community organizations, and rather than creating our own engagement, videos and that sort of thing, we had our team go to different groups such as Nurturing Independence Through Artistic Development in Richmond, the Rise Youth Center, Fillmore Merchants and Neighborhood Collaborative, talking about a Black Voter Information Center. And we went to where people were at with our coverage so they didn't have to come find us. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.